The dusty streets of White Oaks, New Mexico Territory, stretched before Delilah Porter like a vast expanse of nothing. And on her 18th birthday in the summer of 1882, she stood behind the counter of Henderson's general store, wondering if this emptiness would define the rest of her life. She'd been orphaned at 12 when scarlet fever swept through the region, claiming both her parents within 3 days of each other. Old Mrs. Henderson had taken her in more out of necessity than kindness, needing someone to work the store while her rheumatism kept her bedridden upstairs. Delilah slept in the storage room behind the flour sacks and earned her keep by opening the store at dawn and closing it well after dusk. She'd grown from a gangly child into a young woman in this place, her hands calloused from unpacking crates, her auburn hair always smelling faintly of coffee beans and tobacco. The bell above the door chimed, and Delilah looked up from the inventory ledger she'd been struggling with. Her breath caught slightly as a tall cowboy stepped inside, his silhouette framed by the harsh afternoon sunlight. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair slightly too long at the collar and eyes the color of summer sky. Dust covered his clothes from what must have been days on the trail. "Afternoon, miss," he said, his voice carrying the rough edges of outdoor living but an underlying gentleness that surprised her. "Name's Caleb Coleman, just hired on at the Wilson Ranch. Welcome to White Oaks, Mr. Coleman." Delilah tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, suddenly conscious of her worn calico dress and the ink stain on her fingers. "What can I help you find?" Caleb Coleman moved through the store slowly, his spurs jingling softly against the wooden floor. He picked up a tin of peaches, examined it as though it contained the secrets of the universe, then brought it to the counter. "I'll take this." She wrapped it carefully in brown paper. "That'll be 20 cents. He paid and left, and Delilah thought nothing more of it until the next morning when he returned just after opening. This time he bought a bag of peppermint sticks, though he didn't look like a man with a sweet tooth. The third day he purchased a harmonica, paying extra for the nicest one in the store. By the end of the week, Caleb Coleman had bought a tin coffee pot, 3 pairs of socks he clearly didn't need, a pocket knife to replace the perfectly good one on his belt, 2 bars of fancy soap, a book of poetry that made Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows raise when she shuffled downstairs to check on things, and enough licorice to stock his own store. "That cowboy sweet on you," Mrs. Henderson observed, her shrewd eyes missing nothing despite her age. "Coming in here every day buying nonsense." Delilah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He's just settling in, probably needs supplies." "Nobody needs 6 handkerchiefs in 1 week, girl." Mrs. Henderson's laugh turned into a wheeze. "And I saw him watching you when you were arranging the canned goods. Man looks at you like you're water and he's been crossing the desert." The observation stayed with Delilah long after Mrs. Henderson retreated upstairs. She found herself taking extra care with her appearance, pinning her hair more carefully, wearing her better dress despite saving it for Sundays. When Caleb came in on Monday, she'd worked up the courage to actually look at him properly instead of keeping her eyes down. He was probably 22 or 23, she guessed, with the lean build of someone who worked hard for his living. A scar ran along his jawline, barely visible beneath several days of stubble. His hands were strong and tanned, the hands of a man who knew cattle and horses and hard work. But it was his eyes that caught her, the kindness in them that seemed at odds with the rough world he inhabited. "Morning, Miss Porter," he said, and she realized with a start that he'd learned her name. "Morning, Mr. Coleman. What can I get for you today?" He wandered the aisles again, that same careful consideration given to each item. Finally, he brought a small mirror to the counter, the kind with a painted porcelain back showing blue flowers. "This is real pretty," he said. "Reckon someone might like it." Delilah wrapped it carefully, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her chest. Of course he was buying for someone else. A man like him probably had a girl somewhere, maybe even a wife. She'd been foolish to let Mrs. Henderson's words plant hope in her heart. "That'll be $1.50, she said, keeping her voice professional. Caleb paid, but he didn't leave. He stood at the counter, turning his hat in his hands. "Miss Porter, I was wondering if you might tell me something. If I can." "What makes you smile? I mean really smile, not the polite one you give customers, but the kind that reaches your eyes." The question was so unexpected that Delilah actually looked up and met his gaze fully. "I don't understand." "I've been trying to figure it out for 2 weeks now," Caleb said, a hint of color rising in his tanned face. "Bought every fool thing I could think of, hoping something might make you light up. But you just stay polite and pleasant, and I can't help thinking there's sadness under it that nobody sees." Delilah's throat tightened. Nobody had asked her such a thing before. Nobody had seemed to notice that behind her capable manner and ready service, she was lonely and adrift. "Mr. Coleman, I don't know what to say. The mirror's for you if you'll take it," he continued, his words coming faster now as though he'd been holding them back too long. "Everything I bought was just an excuse to come see you. I know it's forward, and I know you probably think I'm crazy, but from the first moment I walked in here and saw you standing in the light from that window, I haven't been able to get you out of my mind." She stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "You bought all those things just to see me?" "Yes, madam, and I'd buy out the whole store if it would make you smile. Really smile." Before Delilah could respond, Mrs. Henderson's voice crackled from the top of the stairs. "Girl, stop standing around gossiping and get those shelves stocked. Shipment came in yesterday." The moment broke. Caleb replaced his hat and headed for the door, but paused with his hand on the frame. "I work late most days, but Sunday after church, there's usually a social. Would you do me the honor of letting me accompany you?" Delilah glanced toward the stairs, knowing Mrs. Henderson was listening. The old woman rarely let her do anything beyond work and the occasional church service. But something in Caleb's earnest expression made her brave. "I'd like that very much." His smile transformed his whole face, and Delilah felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with possibility. The days until Sunday crawled by with agonizing slowness. Mrs. Henderson grumbled about young fools and wasted time, but she didn't forbid the outing. Delilah suspected the old woman was more romantic than she let on. On Saturday evening, Mrs. Henderson actually came downstairs with a bundle. "This was mine when I was about your age," she said, thrusting a dress at Delilah. "Butter yellow. Never suited me, but it'll look fine with your coloring. Don't go getting ideas, though. One social doesn't mean anything." But the gleam in her eye said otherwise, and Delilah hugged her impulsively, feeling the old woman stiffen then pat her back awkwardly. Sunday morning dawned clear and hot. Delilah attended services at the small church, barely hearing Reverend Matthews drone on about temperance. She was too aware of Caleb sitting 3 rows back, his hair neatly combed, wearing what must be his only good shirt. When the service ended, he was waiting outside. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and Delilah was glad she'd taken extra time with her hair, weaving it into a complex braid that hung down her back. The social was held in the schoolhouse yard, tables laden with food that the townswomen had prepared. Children ran between the adults, their laughter bright against the afternoon air. A fiddler struck up a tune and couples began to dance. Delilah had never been to one of these gatherings, always too busy with the store or too conscious of her orphaned status to feel welcome. Caleb guided her to a quieter spot beneath a cottonwood tree. I'm not much of a dancer, he admitted. Got 2 left feet according to my sister. You have a sister? 3 of them, actually, all back in Texas with my folks. I'm the youngest, came out here to make my own way. He smiled. They all bossed me around something terrible growing up. Probably why I'm so tongue-tied around women now. You don't seem tongue-tied to me. That's because you make it easy, Caleb said. Some girls, they want you to put on a show, pretend to be something you're not. But you just look at me with those green eyes and I feel like I can say anything. They talked for hours. Delilah learned that Caleb had been working cattle since he was 14, that he dreamed of having his own spread someday, that he loved the land with a passion that made his voice grow warm. She told him about her parents, about the loneliness of the past 6 years, about how she taught herself to read better using the dime novels that came through the store. What would you do if you could do anything? Caleb asked as the sun began to sink lower. Delilah considered the question seriously. I'd like to have a home, a real home, not just a storage room, with windows that let in light and maybe a garden, nothing fancy, just somewhere that's mine. That doesn't seem like too much to ask, Caleb said softly. Every person deserves a place to belong. When he walked her back to the store that evening, he took her hand. His palm was rough against hers, but the gesture felt right. At the door, he tipped his hat. May I call on you again? I'd like that. True to his word, Caleb became a regular fixture at the general store. He still bought things, but now he'd linger to talk, helping her stock shelves or carry in deliveries. The other cowboys who came to town started teasing him about it, but he bore it with good humor. Delilah learned to recognize his footsteps, the particular rhythm of his spurs, and her heart would lift before he even entered. 6 weeks after their first social, Caleb arrived at the store looking troubled. Delilah was alone, Mrs. Henderson having finally taken to her bed for good. The doctor had been that morning and said it was only a matter of time. The old woman's heart was giving out. What's wrong? Delilah asked immediately. Caleb removed his hat, working the brim between his fingers. Wilson's selling the ranch. New owners bringing in his own crew. We've all got until the end of the month. The news hit Delilah like a physical blow. You're leaving? Don't want to, Caleb said. But work's work. I've been asking around town, but nobody's hiring. Might have to head up to Colorado, heard there's ranches up there looking for hands. Delilah turned away, not wanting him to see the tears threatening. She'd been foolish to let herself care so much. In her world, everyone left eventually. Death or distance, it made no difference. Caleb's hand touched her shoulder gently. Delilah, look at me. She turned, and he caught her face in his hands with surprising tenderness. I don't want to go. These past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. I know it's fast, and I know I don't have much to offer, but I'm in love with you. Have been since that first day. Caleb, she whispered, her voice breaking. Come with me, he said urgently. Marry me. We'll figure it out together. I'll work whatever jobs I can find, save up for that home you want. It might take time, but I swear I'll give you everything I can. Delilah wanted to say yes with every fiber of her being, but reality intruded. I can't leave Mrs. Henderson. She's dying. I owe her everything. Caleb's expression shifted to understanding rather than disappointment. Then I'll stay until the end. Find work here somehow, even if it's mucking stables or digging ditches. You do that, for you. I'd do just about anything. Mrs. Henderson died 3 days later, peacefully in her sleep. Delilah found her in the morning and wept for the woman who'd been stern but kind, who'd given her a home when she had nothing. The funeral was small, attended by the few townspeople who'd known the shopkeeper. To everyone's surprise, Mrs. Henderson's will left the store to Delilah. She told me last week, Reverend Matthews explained after the reading. Said you'd earned it 10 times over and she had no kin who'd care anyway. The building, the stock, all of it. It's yours free and clear. Delilah stood in the empty store that night, looking at the shelves she'd stocked countless times, the counter she'd stood behind for 6 years. It should have felt like victory, like security. Instead, it felt like another cage tying her to this place. Caleb found her there, standing in the near darkness. "Delilah, she left me the store," Delilah said. "I'm a property owner now, isn't that something?" He heard the hollowness in her voice. "What do you want to do?" "I want to burn it down," she said, surprising herself with the vehemence. Then she laughed, a slightly wild sound. "I want to walk away and never look back. I want to see something beyond these same walls. Is that terrible? She just died and I'm already wanting to abandon what she left me." Caleb crossed to her and pulled her into his arms. She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of him, leather and sage and honest sweat. "It's not terrible. It's human. She gave you a gift, Delilah, but that doesn't mean you have to spend your life here if it makes you miserable." "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "Then let's think it through together," Caleb said. "The store's worth something. You could sell it, use the money to start fresh wherever we go, or we could stay, run it together. I don't know the first thing about storekeeping, but I can learn. Or we could find someone to manage it and collect rent while we do something else. There are options." The word we settled into Delilah's heart like a bomb. She wasn't alone anymore. "You still want to marry me?" "More than ever. Haven't changed my mind in the past 3 days." She pulled back to look at him. "Then yes, I'll marry you." Caleb's kiss was gentle at first, then deeper as she responded, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Soon," he said. "I want to marry you soon." They wed 2 weeks later in the same church where they'd met after services. Delilah wore the butter-yellow dress again, and Caleb had saved up for a simple gold band. The ceremony was quick, but when Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Delilah felt something shift fundamentally in her world. She belonged to someone and someone belonged to her. She wasn't orphaned anymore. They spent their wedding night in the storage room behind the store, the same cramped space Delilah had slept in for years. But with Caleb beside her, it felt different. He was patient and tender, making her feel cherished rather than rushed. Afterward, lying in his arms, Delilah finally let herself believe in the future. "I've been thinking," Caleb said, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "About the store. What if we kept it but hired someone to run it? The Martins have that daughter, Jenny. She's smart and needs work. We could pay her a fair wage, keep the income coming, but you wouldn't be tied here every day." "And what would we do?" "I heard the Carsons need help at their ranch. Not just cowboy work, but someone to manage their books, handle their supply orders. They're getting old and their son moved to California. It's not much, but it's a start. We could save up, maybe buy some land of our own eventually." Delilah considered it. The Carsons were decent people and their ranch was only an hour's ride from town. "I'd like that, working together." "Partners," Caleb agreed. "In everything." The next morning they approached Jenny Martin, a capable 19-year-old who'd been struggling to help her family after her father's injury in the mine. She accepted the job eagerly, and Delilah spent a week training her on the inventory system, the regular customers, and how to handle the accounts. It was strange, handing over the reins of a place that had defined her life for so long, but also liberating. The Carsons welcomed them warmly. Mr. Carson was a gruff man in his 60s with a bad leg from an old break that hadn't healed right. Mrs. Carson was sharp-minded but going blind. They needed help desperately and were grateful to have it. Delilah took over the household accounts and supply management, while Caleb worked the cattle alongside the 3 other hands they employed. The work was hard but satisfying. Delilah discovered she had a knack for managing the ranch's finances, finding ways to stretch their resources and negotiate better prices with suppliers. The Carsons gave them a small cabin on the property, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it had windows that let in morning light and space for Delilah to start a small garden. For the first time in her life, she felt truly happy. Caleb would come home exhausted from long days in the saddle, but he'd always greet her with a kiss and ask about her day. They'd eat dinner together, simple meals of beans and cornbread, or whatever Delilah had managed to prepare. Afterward, they'd sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "I love you," Caleb would say, sometimes out of nowhere, like the words couldn't be contained, and Delilah would lean into him, breathing in the moment, and reply, "I love you too." Their first real test came that winter when a blizzard swept through New Mexico territory with unexpected ferocity. The temperature plummeted, and cattle began dying in the fields. Caleb and the other hands worked around the clock trying to move the herd to shelter, to break ice on water sources, to save what they could. Delilah helped Mrs. Carson prepare endless pots of hot food and coffee, keeping the stove burning to provide warmth for the men who came in half frozen. On the 3rd day of the storm, Caleb didn't come back with the others. Delilah felt her heart stop as Tom Garrett, one of the ranch hands, stumbled through the door alone. "He's out there looking for strays," Tom said through chattering teeth. "Told him to come back, but he wouldn't listen." Said every head of cattle matters to the Carsons. Without thinking, Delilah grabbed her heaviest coat. "Where? You can't go out in this," Mrs. Carson protested. "You'll die of exposure." But Delilah was already wrapping a scarf around her face. Tom, seeing the determination in her eyes, sighed and pulled his coat back on. "I'll show you the direction," he headed. The world outside was a whiteout, snow driving so hard it was impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Delilah followed Tom's horse, her own mount struggling through drifts that came up to its chest. The cold bit through every layer of clothing, and fear for Caleb drove her forward. They found him near a ravine, his horse standing protectively over him. Caleb had fallen, his leg twisted at an awkward angle. He was conscious but clearly in pain. "Delilah," his voice was weak. "What are you doing out here, saving your stubborn hide?" she said, dropping to her knees beside him despite the snow. "Can you ride?" "Broke my leg," he managed. "Maybe my ankle too. Fell into a hole hidden by the snow." Tom helped her get Caleb onto his horse, though every movement made him groan with pain. The ride back seemed to take hours. By the time they reached the ranch house, Delilah herself was so cold she could barely feel her fingers and toes. The doctor came as soon as the storm cleared enough, setting Caleb's leg and confirming a badly sprained ankle. "He'll need to stay off it for at least 6 weeks, the doctor said. Lucky it was a clean break. Those 6 weeks tested them both. Caleb hated being confined to bed, chafing at his inability to work. Delilah balanced caring for him with her duties managing the ranch accounts. Money was tight after the cattle losses, and she spent long nights poring over the books, trying to find ways to make things stretch. "I'm sorry," Caleb said one evening, watching her work by lamplight. "You shouldn't have to carry everything alone." Delilah set down her pencil and moved to sit beside him on the bed. "We're partners, remember. When you can't carry your half, I carry it for you. And when I can't carry mine, you'll do the same. I was a fool to go out in that storm." "You were brave," she corrected. "Maybe too brave for your own good, but you were trying to help people who have been good to us. I can't fault you for that." Caleb pulled her close, wincing at the movement. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "I think we found each other," Delilah said. "Now stop moving around and let that leg heal." When spring came, Caleb was back on his feet, though he walked with a slight limp when the weather turned cold. The ranch had survived the winter, barely, but survived nonetheless. The Carsons were so grateful for Delilah and Caleb's dedication that they made them an offer. "We're getting too old for this," Mr. Carson said, his wife nodding beside him. "Our son wants nothing to do with ranching. We'd like to sell you the place, let you pay it off over time from the profits. Fair price, fair terms." Delilah and Caleb looked at each other, hardly daring to believe it. "Are you certain?" Caleb asked. "Certain as sunrise," Mrs. Carson said. "You two have treated this land and us with respect. We'd rather see it in your hands than some strangers." They signed the papers that summer, and suddenly Delilah Coleman owned not just a general store she rented out, but a working cattle ranch. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The Carsons moved to town, taking a small house near the church, and visited often to see how the ranch was progressing. Caleb proved to be a natural rancher, with an eye for good cattle and a way with the animals that made them trust him. Delilah managed the business side, expanding their markets and finding buyers willing to pay premium prices for quality beef. Together, they made it work. 2 years after their wedding, Delilah realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She'd never known her own mother as a parent, only as a vague childhood memory. What if she didn't know how to be a mother herself? Caleb's reaction dispelled her fears. He was overjoyed, picking her up and spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. "We're going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "An actual baby." "That's generally what happens," Delilah teased, but she felt the same amazement. The pregnancy was difficult at times. Morning sickness kept her miserable for months, and the summer heat made her swell uncomfortably. But Caleb was attentive to the point of being overbearing, constantly fussing over her until she had to shoo him away to get anything done. Their son was born in March of 1885, arriving after a long and exhausting labor that left Delilah weak but triumphant. They named him Daniel, after Delilah's father. He had Caleb's blue eyes and Delilah's auburn hair, and from the moment he was placed in her arms, she loved him with a fierceness that surprised her. Watching Caleb with their son was a revelation. He was gentle and patient, singing soft songs to soothe Daniel's crying, walking the floor at night when Delilah was too exhausted. He'd sit by the window with the baby cradled against his chest, telling him stories about the ranch, about the cattle, about the wide sky overhead. "He can't understand you," Delilah said one evening, watching them from the bed. "Not yet," Caleb agreed. "But someday he will, and I want him to know his father's voice, to know he's loved." Daniel grew into a bright, curious toddler who wanted to follow his father everywhere. Caleb made him a small wooden horse that Daniel carried everywhere, sleeping with it clutched in his fist. The ranch prospered, allowing them to hire more hands and expand the herd. When Daniel was 3, Delilah discovered she was pregnant again. This time she felt more confident, though the pregnancy was even harder than the first. She delivered twin girls in the winter of 1888. 2 tiny perfect creatures they named Dorothy and Deanna. The house suddenly felt very full and very small. Caleb spent that spring building an addition, adding 2 more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. Delilah managed the ranch business between nursing twins and chasing after Daniel, who at 5 had decided he was a cowboy and needed to help with everything. The twins were different as night and day. Dorothy was quiet and observant, content to sit and watch the world around her. Deanna was into everything, crawling at 6 months and walking by 9, always seeking new adventures. Caleb joked that Diana had gotten Delilah's determination, while Dorothy had inherited his tendency to think before acting. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, of early mornings and exhausted evenings. They celebrated birthdays and holidays, weathered droughts and hard winters, lost cattle to disease, and gained ground with good breeding. The general store in town continued to provide steady income under Jenny Martin's capable management, now with her husband helping. Delilah would sometimes stand on the porch in the evenings, watching Caleb teach Daniel to rope a fence post while the twins played in the dirt nearby, and marvel at how much her life had changed. From the orphaned girl behind a counter to this, a woman with land and family and purpose. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked one such evening, coming to stand beside her after putting the children to bed. "That I'm happy," Delilah said simply. "That I never thought I could have this." Caleb wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her head. "You deserve every bit of it. You're the strongest person I know. I'm only strong because you're beside me. Then we're strong together," he said, turning her to face him. Same as always. They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Inside, their children slept safely. Around them, their land stretched fertile and peaceful. It was everything Delilah had dreamed of and more. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Daniel grew into a serious young boy who loved the ranch and the animals with the same passion as his father. The twins developed their own interests, Dorothy showing an aptitude for numbers that reminded Delilah of herself, while Deanna had an artistic streak, always drawing pictures of horses and cattle and the endless sky. When Daniel was 12, he asked if he could start working the cattle with Caleb and the hands. Delilah's first instinct was to refuse, to keep her firstborn safe and close. But she saw the eagerness in his eyes, the need to prove himself, and she understood. She'd felt that same need once, to be more than people expected. "He can try," she told Caleb, "but you watch him close." Caleb ruffled Daniel's hair affectionately. "I'll take care of him, same as always." Watching her son ride out with his father that first morning, Delilah felt her heart clench with pride and fear. He sat his horse well, his young back straight, determined to do his part. She'd been so focused on building a life that she hadn't fully realized her children were growing up, becoming their own people. Dorothy found her in the kitchen later, working on the account books. "Mother, may I help?" Delilah looked at her daughter, now 10 years old and tall for her age, her green eyes serious behind the spectacles they'd gotten her the year before. "You want to learn the business. I want to understand how things work," Dorothy said. "The numbers, the planning. You make it seem like solving a puzzle." So Delilah began teaching her daughter the same skills she'd learned through necessity and practice. Dorothy proved to be a quick study, grasping concepts that had taken Delilah months to understand. They'd work together in the evenings, Dorothy asking questions and Delilah explaining the intricacies of managing a ranch's finances. Diana, meanwhile, spent her time sketching everything she could see. She had a gift for capturing movement, for making horses seem to gallop across the page. When a traveling artist came through White Oaks, Delilah paid for Deanna to have lessons, recognizing a talent that deserved nurturing. The ranch continued to grow. They bought adjacent land when it became available, expanding their grazing territory. Caleb developed a reputation for raising quality cattle, and buyers came from as far as Texas to purchase from them. The money they made was reinvested in the land, in better breeding stock, in improvements that made the work easier. One evening when Delilah was 35, she and Caleb sat on the porch after the children had gone to bed. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together after the chaos of the day. "You ever think about that first day?" Delilah asked. When you walked into the store. Caleb smiled, the expression creating familiar creases around his eyes. Every day. I was so nervous I almost turned around and left. Thought you were the prettiest thing I'd ever seen, and I didn't have a prayer of catching your attention. So you bought a tin of peaches. Seemed safer than trying to actually talk to you, he admitted. Though I'm not sure what I would have done if you'd told me to leave you alone. I would never have done that, Delilah said. Even then, something about you felt right, like you were someone I'd been waiting for without knowing it. Caleb took her hand, his thumb rubbing across her knuckles. Best money I ever spent, all those ridiculous purchases, led me to you. Led us to each other, Delilah corrected. I'm glad you were brave enough to keep coming back. Love makes you brave, Caleb said. Makes you willing to risk looking foolish if there's even a chance it might work out. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one against the darkening sky. 20 years of marriage hadn't diminished what they felt for each other, had only deepened it into something rich and lasting. The next decade brought more changes. Daniel married a local girl named Sarah when he was 22, a sweet-natured woman who fit seamlessly into the family. They built a house on the far end of the ranch property, and Daniel took on more responsibility in running the cattle operation. Dorothy, to everyone's surprise, announced she wanted to attend a teacher's college in Santa Fe. Delilah's heart hurt at the thought of her daughter leaving, but she couldn't deny Dorothy the education she herself had never had. I'll come back, Dorothy promised the night before she left. This is my home. I just want to learn more to see what else is out there. I understand, Delilah said, hugging her daughter tight. More than you know. Deanna stayed closer to home, eventually marrying a rancher's son from a neighboring spread. Her artwork began selling in galleries in Santa Fe, and even as far as San Francisco. Paintings of the New Mexico landscape that captured something essential about the wild beauty of the territory. By the time Delilah turned 50 in 1914, she was a grandmother 3 times over. Daniel and Sarah had 2 sons and a daughter. Deanna and her husband had a little girl who showed early signs of inheriting her mother's artistic talent. The ranch had grown into one of the most successful operations in the region. Dorothy had returned from college as promised, bringing with her a quiet schoolteacher named William who became her husband. They opened a school in White Oaks, educating not just the town children but those from the surrounding ranches. Dorothy's sharp mind and gentle teaching style made her beloved by students and parents alike. Caleb's hair had gone silver, though he was still strong and active. The limp from his long-ago broken leg was more pronounced now, but it didn't slow him down much. He'd handed over most of the daily cattle work to Daniel and the hands, but he still rode out most mornings to check on things. Can't help myself, he told Delilah. This land's in my blood. They'd weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical, droughts that threatened the herd, blizzards that killed cattle, fluctuating markets that tested their finances. Through it all, they'd held together, supporting each other as they'd promised on their wedding day. The general store in White Oaks had eventually been sold to Jenny Martin and her husband outright, providing a nest egg that gave them security in their later years. The ranch provided more than enough income, especially with Daniel managing it so capably, but it was nice to know they had reserves. On a warm evening in late spring, Delilah and Caleb celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the main house, now expanded to accommodate the growing family. Tables were set up outside, laden with food prepared by 3 generations of Coleman women. Music played, a guitar and fiddle creating the same kind of tunes that had filled the air at that first social where Caleb had asked to court her. Daniel stood and raised his glass. To my parents, who showed me what real love looks like, what partnership means, how to build something that lasts. Dorothy added, to the mother who taught me that women can be strong and smart and still tender, who encouraged my dreams even when they took me away. Deanna finished, to the father who taught me to see beauty everywhere, to the mother who taught me to value it. Caleb and Delilah stood together, his arm around her waist, both of them touched beyond words. Looking at their family, at the life they'd built, Delilah felt a contentment so profound it almost hurt. Later, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Caleb and Delilah walked slowly to their cabin. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. 40 years, Caleb said wonderingly. Doesn't seem possible. Best 40 years of my life, Delilah replied. Mine too, though I have to say the first time I saw you I never imagined all this. The ranch, the children, the grandchildren, I just knew I wanted to see you smile. Delilah turned to face him, reaching up to touch his weathered face. You've given me so many reasons to smile every single day. That was always the plan, Caleb said, pulling her close. Still is. I might be old and creaky, but I'm not done making you happy yet. They kissed under the stars, and Delilah marveled that after 40 years, his kiss could still make her heart race. They'd been through so much together, built so much, and yet the foundation of it all remained the same: the orphaned girl and the cowboy who'd bought everything in the store just to see her smile. The years continued their steady march. Caleb's health began to decline when he was in his mid-70s. His heart wasn't as strong as it once was, and the doctor advised him to take things easier. He grumbled about it but complied, spending more time on the porch and less time in the saddle. Delilah, at 73, was still sharp and active, though her hands trembled with arthritis on cold mornings. She'd handed over most of the business management to Dorothy, who'd proven just as capable as her mother. But Delilah still liked to review the books, to keep her hand in. They'd added more grandchildren over the years, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch had expanded to include Daniel's sons as partners. It was truly a family enterprise now, spanning generations. On a quiet afternoon in autumn, Delilah found Caleb sitting on the porch, looking out over the land they'd built together. She settled into the chair beside him, taking his hand. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "That I'm grateful," Caleb said, "for every moment, every day. I wake up next to you and I can't believe I get to do this again, even after all this time." "I feel the same," Delilah said softly. "You changed my life, Caleb Coleman, gave me everything I'd ever wanted and things I didn't even know to dream about." "We did that together," he corrected. "I just provided the initial push." "Some push. You bought half the store," Caleb laughed, the sound still warm despite the years. "Worth every penny, would do it again in a heartbeat." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson. The land around them was rich and peaceful, well tended by those who loved it. Cattle grazed in the distance. Somewhere a child laughed, one of the great-grandchildren playing in the yard. "No regrets?" Caleb asked. "Not a single one," Delilah replied. "You? Only that we didn't have more time." "But I suppose that's greedy. We've had more happiness than most people get in 3 lifetimes." Delilah squeezed his hand, understanding the mortality in his words but not fearing it. They'd lived fully, loved deeply, built something lasting. When the time came, whenever it came, they'd face it as they'd faced everything else together. That winter was gentle, with light snows that blanketed the ranch in white but didn't threaten the livestock. Caleb's health held steady, though he tired more easily. They spent their days much as they'd spent the past 50 years in each other's company, comfortable with silence and conversation alike. One morning in early spring, Delilah woke to find Caleb watching her with such love in his eyes that it took her breath away. "Good morning," she said. "The best morning," he replied, "because you're in it." They rose slowly, bodies stiff with age but spirits willing. After breakfast, they walked to the barn where Caleb's favorite horse, now elderly herself, nickered a greeting. Caleb fed her an apple, stroking her neck. "Remember when we used to ride for hours?" he asked. "I remember everything," Delilah said. "Every moment matters." That afternoon, surrounded by family who'd gathered for Sunday dinner as had become their tradition, Caleb told stories about the early days. About buying ridiculous things at the general store, about the blizzard that nearly killed him, about the first time he'd held each of his children. "Your mother saved me," he told the assembled family. "Not just that day in the storm, but every day. She made me want to be better, to build something worthwhile." "We saved each other," Delilah corrected, her voice firm despite the emotion in it. "That's what love does." Later, after everyone had left, Caleb grew tired and went to bed early. Delilah sat beside him, reading aloud from one of the books they both enjoyed. His hand found hers on the quilt. "Delilah," he said softly, "I love you, have loved you for over 50 years, will love you forever." "And I love you," she replied, "always." He fell asleep with a smile on his face, and Delilah stayed beside him, unwilling to waste a moment of whatever time they had left. Caleb died peacefully in his sleep 3 days later, his heart simply giving out. The doctor said he'd felt no pain, had just slipped away between one breath and the next. Delilah held his hand, feeling the warmth slowly fade, and said goodbye to the man who'd been her partner for more than half a century. The grief was profound but not bitter. They'd had so much time, so much love. The funeral drew people from across the territory, ranchers and townsfolk alike who'd known Caleb's kindness and integrity. He was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, a spot he'd always loved for its view of the mountains. Delilah stood at the graveside after everyone else had left, looking at the fresh earth. "Thank you," she whispered, "for every smile, every kiss, every moment. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for loving me." The wind rustled through the grass, and Delilah imagined it was his answer, that he'd heard, that he understood, that love didn't end with death. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who made sure she was never alone. She walked every day to Caleb's grave, talking to him about the ranch, about the family, about the memories they'd made together. Sometimes she'd bring the old porcelain mirror he'd bought her so long ago, the paint faded now but the flowers still visible. "You made me smile," she'd say. Every single day. When Delilah's time came at the age of 78, she went peacefully in her sleep, just as Caleb had. Her children found her in the morning, a smile on her face, one hand reaching across the bed to where her husband had once slept. They buried her beside Caleb on the hill, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and the years they'd lived. But the real memorial was all around in the thriving ranch that bore their name, in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their legacy forward, in the stories that were told and retold about the orphaned girl and the cowboy who'd bought everything in the store just to see her smile. The general store in White Oak still stood, now owned by the Martin family's descendants. The ranch continued to prosper under Daniel's management, then his sons after him. Dorothy's school educated generation after generation of children, teaching them not just reading and arithmetic, but the value of kindness and determination. Diana's paintings hung in museums, capturing the beauty of the land her parents had loved. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the New Mexico mountains, painting the sky in gold and crimson, those who knew the story would sometimes think of Delilah and Caleb. of how love had transformed two lonely people into something greater, of how a simple act of buying peaches and peppermints and ridiculous things just for an excuse to talk to a girl had grown into a legacy that spanned generations. Because that's what real love does. It builds, it endures, it transforms. It starts with a smile and grows into forever, creating something beautiful that outlasts even death itself.